was 6 when I was adopted. The family that adopted me weren't rich by any means, but they were pretty well off. My adopted family consisted of 5 other members who I will be changing the names of for privacy purposes. A mom and dad who I will call John and Amy, 2 daughters who I will call Jessica and Jen, and a son who I will call Peter. I also want to mention that we lived in a fairly small town. I won't disclose the location, but our population is probably less than 300 people. One of the things I learned a few years into my adoption is that Jen once had a twin who I will name Jenny. Due to them being twins, and this being the 70s, they were born with many birth defects. While Jen was able to overcome hers, Jenny was not, and she died at 8 because of it. The family was of course distraught because of this. My mother went into a deep depression, and the only thing that helped her was working with kids, which is why she started working with orphanage agencies and adopted me soon after. For the most part, I had lived a pretty normal life. I would even say that I was more privileged than most kids in my area due to my family. They had connections all over the town and even in nearby towns due to my dad being close to the mayor and my mom being very school involved. I was treated just as good as my parents' real children. I had sleepovers, went to school, had chores, got punished when I did wrong, just got everything a normal child receives. I honestly truly loved my life and felt so lucky things turned out the way they did. More than a decade later, I turned 18. It was the end of the school year, and I had been accepted into my dream school that was out of state. A week prior to me leaving, me and my best friend Emma were home alone, and she was helping me finish up my packing. We had gotten pretty much everything packed up and were just chilling around the house when she suggested that we explore the house together one more time so that we can reminisce. I saw no problem with it, so we did. We took our time just walking around the house together, talking about things we did together and trying our best to hold back tears. We had walked through the whole house and were about to go out when my friend suggested going into the basement. Growing up and even now, we were never allowed into the basement. I hesitated at first, but after a while, I gave in. We were all alone, and I saw my dad go into it before, so it couldn't be too dangerous. We went into the basement and were exploring. One of the main things I saw in it was pictures of Jenny. I had seen Jenny before, but these were all pictures I hadn't seen. It honestly made me tear up. She looked so happy in her pictures, especially the ones where she was with Jen. Emma noticed that I was getting emotional, so she grabbed the picture from me, sat it down, then grabbed my hand and started guiding me back towards the basement stairs. Right before we reached the stairs, I heard this very faint tapping. Me and Emma both stopped, so I realized she heard it too. We both went quiet and listened, and we heard the sound again. It was coming from the wall beside the stairs. Me and her slowly went to the wall and heard the faint sounds again. I pressed against the wall, and it began to slide open. I realized it wasn't a wall, it was a secret door that just blended in with the wall. I was hesitant about pushing the door all the way open, but something told me I had to, so I did. I pushed it open, and the smell of poop and urine hit me instantly. I walked into this black chamber-like room, and laying on the floor just in front of the door was this malnourished, pale woman. I didn't even have to look at her for too long before I realized it was Jenny. She was laying on the floor trying to catch her breath. I could tell that she had crawled to the door from the mat that was on the other side of the room. I walked over to try to help her, but she stopped me just before I could get to her. She pointed at the corner of the room to this journal. I walked over and grabbed the journal and brought it to her, but she shook her head, laid back down, and pointed at the door. I stayed there for a few minutes just watching her, not knowing what to do, but she kept pointing towards the door as she stared away from us. I finally got what she meant and left without uttering a word. Me and Emma were completely dumbfounded. We left the house and went to her car. At first, I really tried to rationalize what I had saw. I was convinced that it wasn't really Jenny and that it was a stranger, and I wanted to call my parents. I didn't even want to open the journal until my parents got home because I just didn't know what I would read. After arguing for a bit, Emma got me to finally agree to reading the journal just to see if it would explain anything. When we first opened the journal, the first 6 or 7 pages were torn out. On the 8th page, the words were scrambled up in the form that looked weird, but Emma pointed out something amazing. When me and her were younger, we made our own little language to keep people from knowing what we were saying. It's kinda hard to explain it, but we jumbled up the words in a way that made it recognizable but spelled incorrectly. We also made the sentence where so many words were backwards while the most vital words weren't. We hadn't done this since middle school, and we thought we were the only 2 who knew about our little secret language. We began reading the journal, and the things we read were horrid. I can't go into too much detail, but the topics were all about the horrible life she was being forced to live. Apparently she did have a disability, but it wasn't as bad as my parents made it seem. She just had a hard time speaking, but because of this they were embarrassed of her. They put on that she had this terrible disability and died because of it, but in reality they had just locked her down here. She went on to talk about how she was fed once a day and how they got a new daughter to replace her. What really hurt me the most is that I realized that her whole life she went through the stages of grief over and over again. In the beginning of the journal, she talked about how hateful she was towards the new girl, but as the journal continued to the last days, she talked like she pretty much accepted everything. She even said things about how she's happy the new girl got to live a decent life even if hers was taken. I then realized my room was right over the basement, so she learned everything through me, which is likely how she learned about our secret language. There was so much more in the journal, but that was the gist of it. That night I felt like the worst person ever. I just couldn't accept the truth. The following day, while I was home alone again, I went back to the basement, but upon entering I realized that Jenny was dead. She was in the exact spot that we left her, but this time was lifeless and even appeared to have had bruises on her neck and torso. That night my father was acting really strange. He kept walking around the house asking questions about a missing journal. Of course I pretended I knew nothing, but I had a feeling he knew something. That night I was laying in bed when he walked in my room and started talking to me. Me and my dad had a very good relationship for the most part. We could talk about anything and everything. I really felt comfortable with him, but on this night he was extremely distant. He basically gave me a speech about leaving for school. While I don't remember it all, I remember him saying multiple times that it's better to leave some things in the dark. I remember right before him leaving, he looked at me with this cold, callous stare and said, "Life isn't a fairy tale. Sometimes you have to understand that you should only worry about your happily ever after." Before leaving the room and slamming the door behind him, that whole week I just felt so guilty about everything. I hated sitting at the dinner table with my family knowing the truth. My mom and dad complimented me and hugged me and loved on me the whole week since I was going to college, but I just couldn't accept any of it. I will admit that I don't know why, but I never reported anything. I not only felt like my parents' connections would somehow keep them from getting in trouble, but I also just felt on the fence about the whole situation. On one hand, Jenny deserved justice, but on the other hand, it felt wrong to turn on the people who gave me the life most orphans can only dream of. It has been over a decade now, but I finally feel like I'm ready to turn my parents in. Even if I don't get the outcome I want, Jenny deserves justice. I just don't think I can continue to live with myself knowing I was the one who took the life she deserved to have.